Hi, and welcome to Historical Influence. In the chaos that followed the collapse of the Roman Empire, Western Europe was a fractured landscape of tribal kingdoms and fading glory. Yet from this turmoil emerged a figure who would reshape the continent and whose legacy endures more than a millennium later. We know him as Charlemagne, or Charles the Great. Born sometime in the 740s AD, traditionally cited as 742 or 748, Charlemagne was the eldest son of Pepin the Short, the first king of the Franks from the Carolingian dynasty. He was born into power, the grandson of the legendary Charles the Hamon Martel, who had famously repelled Islamic invasions and ruled as the de facto monarch until 741. When Pepin the Short died in 768, the massive Frankish kingdom was, according to custom, divided between his two sons, Charlemagne and his younger brother, Carloman. As was common in Frankish history, dividing the kingdom between brothers did not lead to peace. Relations between Charlemagne and Carloman deteriorated rapidly, and open hostility was barely kept at bay by their mother, Bertrada. The tension was palpable, and war seemed imminent. However, history took a sudden turn. In 771, Carloman died unexpectedly at the age of 20. This stroke of luck left Charlemagne as the sole ruler of the Franks. What kind of man was now in charge of Europe's most powerful kingdom? His biographer and contemporary Einhard describes him vividly. Charlemagne was a man of large and strong body, tall but not disproportionately so. His height was 7 times the length of his own foot. He had large, lively eyes, a cheerful face, and a stately dignity whether sitting or standing. He was physically robust, an avid swimmer who loved the natural hot springs of Aachen, and a skilled horseman, which was second nature to the Franks. Secure on his throne, Charlemagne could not simply rest. To maintain his authority and secure his borders, he had to look outward. The stage was set for a reign that would be defined by almost constant warfare and the forging of an empire.
Charlemagne was, first and foremost, a warrior king. His reign lasted 46 to 47 years, and during that time, the Franks were almost constantly at war. His military campaigns doubled the size of the territory he inherited, effectively uniting Western Europe for the first time since the Romans. His first major campaign took him across the Alps. In 772, Pope Adrian I appealed to Charlemagne for help against the Lombards in northern Italy, who were threatening Rome. Charlemagne marched into Italy, laid siege to the Lombard capital of Pavia, and forced their king, Desiderius, to surrender. In a decisive move, Charlemagne exiled Desiderius and took the title King of the Lombards for himself, crowning himself with the famous Iron Crown of Lombardy. He was now master of both Gaul and Italy. However, his longest and most brutal conflict was against the Saxons in the north. Einhard describes this war as the longest and most atrocious of Charlemagne's reign, lasting 33 years. The Saxons were fierce pagans who worshipped demons and frequently raided Frankish borders. Charlemagne led many expeditions personally, destroying their sacred sites, such as the Irminsul, and demanding their conversion to Christianity. The conflict was bitter. Treaties were made and broken repeatedly. It was a war of conquest and religious conversion, which only ended when the Saxons accepted Charlemagne's authority and the Christian faith. To the east, Charlemagne faced the Avars, a nomadic people related to the Huns who had amassed vast treasures from centuries of raiding. In a series of meticulously planned campaigns in the 790s, Charlemagne's armies, led partly by his son Pepin, destroyed the Avar Ring fortresses. The loot captured was immense. Einhard notes that the Franks, previously considered poor, became wealthy overnight with the gold and silver taken from the Avars. Not all campaigns were total victories. In 778, Charlemagne marched into Spain to fight the Moors. While returning across the Pyrenees, his rearguard was ambushed by Basques in the pass of Roncesvalles. Among the dead was Count Roland, prefect of the Breton March. This defeat was immortalized centuries later in the epic Song of Roland, turning a tactical loss into a legend of chivalry. By the end of his conquests, Charlemagne's dominion stretched from the Ebro River in Spain to the Elbe in Germany, and from the North Sea to southern Italy. He had created a new superpower.
By the year 800, Charlemagne was the undisputed master of Western Europe. But his greatest political achievement was yet to come, born out of a crisis in Rome. In 799, Pope Leo III was physically attacked in the streets of Rome by a faction of conspirators who tried to blind him and cut out his tongue. The Pope fled to Charlemagne's camp at Paderborn to beg for protection. Charlemagne, acting as the protector of the church, marched to Rome to restore order. He spent the winter in Rome adjudicating the disputes and clearing the Pope of the charges brought against him. Then came Christmas Day, 800 AD. As Charlemagne knelt in prayer in St. Peter's Basilica, Pope Leo III approached him and placed a crown upon his head. The congregation acclaimed him as Emperor of the Romans. This was a pivotal moment in history. The Pope declared that the Western Roman Empire, which had fallen in 476 AD, was now restored in the person of the King of the Franks. Historians still debate whether Charlemagne planned this. Einhard claims that Charlemagne was so averse to the title initially that he stated he would not have entered the church that day, despite it being a high holy festival, had he known the Pope's intention. However, he accepted the title, becoming the first Holy Roman Emperor, challenging the legitimacy of the Empress Irene, who ruled Byzantium at the time. Though the Byzantine emperors initially refused to recognize him, Charlemagne used diplomacy and the surrender of territories like Venice and Dalmatia to eventually gain their recognition of his imperial title. This coronation did more than just stroke a king's ego. It cemented the alliance between the papacy and the Frankish rulers, a relationship that would define European politics for centuries. It gave Charlemagne a divine sanction for his rule, making him not just a king, but a divinely ordained emperor.
Charlemagne was not merely a conqueror, he was a visionary reformer. His reign sparked a cultural and intellectual revival known today as the Carolingian Renaissance. Despite being a warrior who struggled to write his own name, keeping wax tablets under his pillow to practice his letters at night, Charlemagne had a profound respect for learning. He realized that to govern such a vast empire and to understand the Bible properly, his clergy and administrators needed to be educated. He gathered the greatest minds of his age at his court in Aachen. The most famous of these was Alcuin of York, an Anglo-Saxon scholar who essentially served as his minister of education. Together, they established the Palatine Academy, a center of learning where the liberal arts, grammar, rhetoric, astronomy, and mathematics were taught. One of the most enduring legacies of this era was a reform of handwriting. The scribes of the time developed a new script called Carolingian minuscule. Unlike the difficult Merovingian scripts, this new style used clear, rounded letters and introduced spaces between words. It became the basis for the lowercase letters we use in the Latin alphabet today. Charlemagne also ordered the preservation of knowledge. Monasteries were instructed to copy ancient texts, both Christian and pagan. Many classical Latin works survive today only because they were copied by Carolingian scribes during this period. Art and architecture flourished as well. Charlemagne wanted his capital at Aachen to rival the glory of Rome and Ravenna. He built a magnificent palace and the Palatine Chapel, now part of Aachen Cathedral, importing marble columns and mosaics from Italy to adorn it. The chapel's design, an octagon, symbolized perfection and the resurrection. It remains a masterpiece of early medieval architecture. To govern his realm, Charlemagne issued capitularies, legislative acts that regulated everything from church discipline to the management of royal estates. He sent out envoys known as missi dominici to ensure justice was served even in the most remote corners of his empire, protecting the poor, widows, and orphans.
Toward the end of his life, plagued by fever and a limp, Charlemagne crowned his only surviving legitimate son, Louis the Pious, as co-emperor. On January 28, 814, Charlemagne died in Aachen at the age of 72. He was buried in the basilica he had built, leaving behind a legacy that would outlast his empire. The unity Charlemagne achieved did not last long after his death. His empire was divided among his grandsons by the Treaty of Verdun in 843. This division laid the territorial foundations for modern France, the West Frankish kingdom, and Germany, the East Frankish kingdom. Yet, the idea of a united Europe remained. Charlemagne is widely known as the Father of Europe, or Pater Europae. He united diverse peoples, Franks, Saxons, Lombards, and others under one government and one religion. The royal families of Europe claimed descent from him for centuries, and the Holy Roman Empire he founded lasted in various forms until 1806. Even Napoleon Bonaparte, 1,000 years later, looked to Charlemagne for inspiration, visiting his tomb and calling himself Charlemagne's successor. Today, Charlemagne's influence is still felt. The Charlemagne Prize is awarded annually in Aachen to those who contribute to European unity. He serves as a symbol for the European Union, representing a time when the continent shared a common political and cultural identity. From the battlefield to the schoolroom, from the script we read to the map of Europe we recognize, Charlemagne's fingerprints are everywhere. He rose from a fractured world to become a beacon of order and learning, truly earning the title Charles the Great.
Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that shaped our world.